So with that, I'm Nikki Ryberg, and I'm excited to present Rock Your Resume today. I want to start with just talking a little bit about myself, why I consider myself an expert that's qualified to teach on resumes, as well as my background, because I think that's really helpful to understand when someone's teaching you things and telling you how certain things should be. It's like, well, what do they know? So for what it's worth, I had 15 years of HR leadership experience, and I had quite a bit of hiring and recruiting experience before I got pretty burnt out on HR and I decided to leave the field. I didn't have a plan, so to speak, in place. I just knew that it was really no longer serving my needs or really working for the balance that my family needed. And I just took some time off. It probably would have been helpful to have met with a career coach and had some sort of plan because I'm someone who really does love to work. But through that experience, I started helping some old coworkers out with their resumes or other family and friends that were looking for jobs. Reached out and asked if I could take a peek at their materials, and I loved it. Like, I love sitting down in front of my computer and helping them look better on paper. And I quickly figured out, I bet there's a market opportunity here. I'm sure people would pay me to do this. Most people I know hate writing resumes. It's such a tedious task. And so I Googled it, and sure enough, there was not only a market for it, but there are also certification programs for it. So I thought I knew a lot about resumes from my background in HR, but the reality was I really didn't know as much as I thought. And so I went back to get some certifications, one of which was a certified professional resume writer certification. So I studied, I took a test and passed it. And so I definitely feel very qualified to give this advice today, because what I thought was a good resume was really lacking in terms of what a great resume is. And so I'll share some ways to help make that stand out for folks today. I also, through doing resume writing, quickly realized that a lot of folks were like myself. They were burnt out or they were really unhappy with what they were doing, but they wanted some type of a change or some type of a pivot. They didn't know how to do that. They didn't really know how to best go about doing it. So I went back for more training and certifications, including one as a global career development facilitator. That was a class that I took here at UW-Madison, and then went through like an entire semester, getting more up to speed on the career coaching side of things. And then I've also gone back to get one basically for LinkedIn. That's what the certified digital career strategist is. So I've invested a lot of time, a lot of money into keeping my skills up to date. So I just want you to know these are things that I keep up with, cutting edge and best practices. So everything we talk about today really is what's considered important for today's modern resume. My business is working as a career coach and resume writer for clients all over the US and Canada. I'm on some third-party platforms like Placement. I'm on another one called Mentum. And so these are platforms that I can plug my schedule into and then work as a contractor on those various sites. And then I also do it for my own private clients as well. So I'm super excited to be here today. I've done this talk for a few different job search groups, and I've also done it for the Oregon, Wisconsin Public Library. And I think it's a very value-added topic because a lot of folks, even myself working in HR and recruiting, just don't quite know how to really stand out on paper, and it becomes such an important aspect of your job search, or if you're looking to move up even internally. So hopefully that helps answer any questions in terms of my background or where my area of expertise is coming from. So let's start with, how do you really have a resume that rocks? My answer, the short and sweet one, is you need to have results. In order to really stand out on paper, if you're copying and pasting your job description, if you're copying and pasting some of the tasks that you do on a daily basis, that's not the way to have a resume that stands out. I want to see numbers. Ideally, if you improved revenue, if you made something more efficient by 10%, what the end result was to the business. Were you part of a team that achieved something? What was that achievement? I'd like to see that on there. Do you have context? Context is a huge one for me. A lot of times I hear pushback from folks like, well, I don't have results, I'm not in sales, or I don't have access to that data. And I would say it looks so much different if you put the context into place, such as, overhauled a training program for 200 plus employees and delivered it with 15% more efficiency. Reads so much better to the eye than assist with training coordination. So some small things like that in terms of the context, how many people, how many pages, how many hours, different things like that can be very helpful. Do you have proof? So a lot of times, folks, if you're going through the interview process, you've heard of the STAR interview technique. That's where you give a situation, the task, the action, and the result. I like to challenge folks to do the same thing with their resume, which is what's the problem, what's the action you took, and what was the result. The result to me is the proof that you did a good job or that you're talented at what you do. And so if you're not sure how to do those things, or it's sort of like vague, or it just feels challenging, I have a job search guide on my website, ryberggroup.com, and you can sign up for that free job search guide. And it includes a 30-page resume builder worksheet. So it will ask you questions that will help trigger ways to tie in numbers, context, and proof using the PAR approach, the problem, action, results, and really focusing on your solutions and showcasing what makes you you is the best way to have a resume that really stands out. If it's focused on tasks, job duties, super generic, like here's Susie, here's Emily, I'm holding up both of their resumes and they look the exact same, I can't tell the difference between the two. That's what I mean by generic. I want to know what makes you shine in your job. What are you the most proud of? What have you done that's really gone above and beyond? And even for those of us that with this new topic of quiet quitting, just doing your job, going home, that's okay. For a lot of folks, you just want a job, you're not interested in climbing the ladder. That doesn't mean you don't have something unique that makes you special to that job or makes you strong at it. And so we want to really pull together your strengths to give substance to your resume to help it stand out. I also want to point out that less is definitely more. White space on a resume is good. If it's too busy and there's absolutely no spacing between paragraphs or everything's jumbled on, that's not great. You really need it to be visually appealing to the eye so they're drawn to the things that should stand out. And we'll get into some examples on that later, but I'd just like to start there with less is more. So anytime you can, reread it. Where can you cut words? Where can you cut something? Where can you simplify it? Where can you make it simpler? You don't need to overcomplicate this. You don't need to make it like it's written for a PhD in English. Really, less is more, and keeping it simple and just straightforward is the best path to take when it comes to a resume. So let's start with the look and feel. I think it's really important to understand, first of all, what an ATS is and why it's important. So an ATS is an applicant tracking system. Most companies nowadays, especially if they have over 50 employees, are probably using some type of a software system to post their job openings, to collect resumes, and to use some type of version of artificial intelligence or a robot, so to speak, to help them with their job applications. The reason for this being is in today's marketplace, you could get hundreds of job applications for an opening. And so, especially when we had a less competitive labor market, at the moment, things are still pretty employee favored in terms of there's a lot more job openings than folks looking in particular fields. You will still find that some companies now are kind of a little more challenged on we need more applicant type of thing, but for the most part, there tends to be a lot of application volume. And so one of the ways that recruiters can help get around some of the inefficiencies in their job is putting an applicant tracking system into place. This will allow them to post the ad and collect the resumes. Now, if you're getting, let's say, 3,000 applications for one job opening, you don't possibly have time to read all of those. you really just do not. Working in HR and recruiting, it's just oftentimes those roles are just as busy as other ones. They have a lot of hiring managers they're working with. They're balancing a lot of vacancies. And so it's just not possible. So oftentimes they may put a score in place in terms of, I only want to look at the top 25% of the job applications that came in. And so they do that, and then it whittles it down to, let's say, 50 resumes they have to look at, and they're all really strong and they're well matched for what they're looking for. So they focus there and they move on in their process. Now, who's to say somebody that made the top 25% versus somebody in the bottom 10% wasn't better suited for that role? That comes down to understanding that there is a robot, so to speak, that has a little bit of this process. And you want to keep that in mind when you're applying. So the reason why that becomes important is I think it's really important you have a template or a design that's applicant tracking system friendly. Now, for the most part nowadays, I always recommend uploading your resume as a PDF. And the reality is every system's different. Every parameter is different. And if you were to spend a lot of time trying to find the perfect ATS resume friendly document to use and things like that, it's probably not the best use of your time, because you still want it to look good for a hiring manager. Because if you do make it through the process, or if you're networking and manage to get an interview, or they like what they see, you still want it to look sharp on paper. And so my advice is to try and come up with a template or a design that's ATS friendly. So I have two websites here. We're going to pull those up next. These are both sites that have applicant tracking system friendly resumes, and they're strong for ATS systems. So let's just take a quick break here to pull those up. And I'll give you an idea of what I mean. So the first one is, this is called livecareer.com. I really like this site because it lets you upload your existing resume, and then it will parse it out and allow you to basically dump it into one of their updated templates. It's very user friendly. It's easy to move things around. It's easy to switch out font or colors or spacing. And I just find that it's very efficient to work with. I've seen a lot more clients using resumes from Canva or similar types of templates recently. Those are not as applicant tracking system friendly because they have a lot of graphics and they have a lot of text boxes that they use to do some of their formatting. And it may be more difficult for an ATS to read it. And so I recommend staying away from those. I also don't like those because they're not as easy to tweak on the user end either. So whereas earlier I said white space was great, a lot of times on those templates, I find that they have too much white space and you just don't have the opportunity to get as many of your results in. So this site I can vouch for. I think they do a really good job. They have very attractive resumes available. So it's something to check out. If you're not having a lot of success with your search efforts right now, and you're worried that your resume template may not be ATS friendly, this is one of the quickest ways to test one out and see. A lot of times it's trial and error. If your phone is already ringing a lot right now and you're getting interview requests, my hunch would be your resume is probably not the problem. For not getting a job offer, you may be looking at needing a mock interview or needing to focus more on a results-based interview. But if you're really struggling with the phone's not ringing, or I haven't done a resume in X number of years, I don't even know where to start, something like this site is a terrific place to start because it walks you through the process. Now, for those of you that are also open to a new template, or you feel like your current one needs some enhancing, this particular website is called distinctiveresumetemplates.com, and it is run by one of the country's most esteemed professional resume writers. So we're talking someone who runs a business doing this, does a lot of executive resume writing. This particular business really knows what they're doing, and I can vouch for their products because I've used them with my own clients. They're ATS friendly, but you can see compared to the last site, they're also much more visually appealing to the eye. And so if you're looking for a place to start, their templates start at usually $12. And the nice part is when you purchase one, you have the ability to change colors, to change fonts. You don't have to be set to, like, for instance, this purple color. So usually when people first see these templates, there's tends to be a huge difference between what their resume look like versus what it could look like. So I would challenge you, even if you have something that you like right now and it's down on paper and you don't want to spend a lot of time or any more money on it, look to these sites for some examples of how to format some boxes, how to use different colors and different ways to stand out. You'll notice it's fairly conservative. It's not super graphic heavy. I mean, occasionally, like right here, we may see one where we've got like a bar graph going up, but it just does a really good job of using colors and headers and different colored fonts to help things be visually appealing. So with that, let's go back. So I think the first step is just really selecting that modern ATS look and feel if you have something that's not getting a lot of traction right now, or if you're not sure where to start. I think that the hardest part is using a blank sheet of paper and being like, oh God, where do I go from here? So my tip is to use one of these templates, use a site like this and start there, because that way you're not starting from scratch. And if you already have one that's getting some success, that's okay. Don't overthink it. Content and results still matter the most. You could have the world's prettiest resume and the most fantastic template, but if you haven't really done the due diligence to do the exercises of going through the PAR process, what was the problem, what was the action, what was the result, and really doing that for your current and any of your prior roles, it's not going to matter. That's really what you need to spend your time on and focus there to have your resume stand out. I want to pull up my resume cheat sheet for you. We will be referring back to this through some of the next few slides, and I will be sending this presentation as well as this cheat sheet to the library afterwards so that they can send it on to anyone who would like to get a copy of it. This is a copy of the job guide I was describing earlier, so you can get access to this on my website. So take a peek there. It's super lengthy. It's got lots of great stuff in it. So rather than going through all of that today, I'll just refer you there. But the resume cheat sheet is something I threw together when I was first starting out in this business. I really wanted a way to visually help people understand what they need in their resume. Now you'll notice my template and look and feel here is not as modern and pretty as some of the ones I was just showing you on the prior websites. And frankly, if I were to redo this and overhaul it, I would take the same type of information and put it into one of those templates. But since this is just a freebie I use as examples, I'm not going to spend the time on that right now at this point in my business, but I still think the basics are here and it's really helpful to see, which we'll refer back to here once we get into some of the other aspects of the resume, but just know you'll have this to refer back to later. And it is very helpful to have that visual. Okay, so getting into some of the good stuff. It's crazy to think about, but really the summary and introductory sections are truly the most important part of your resume. What that top 1/3 looks like, that's where you have to have your best and most important stuff out there. If you bury it on page 2 or 3, it's just not going to be as helpful or serving for you. So when you are looking at roles and starting to think about a job search process, think about what are my goals? What type of role am I hoping to get? And what do I bring to the table that makes me uniquely qualified to stand out in those roles? And that is what I need to see on the top 1/3 page of your resume. Your summary should really focus on where you've been, but you should also focus on where you're going. And so the summary is usually kind of those first few lines on the right after your name. It kind of summarizes where you've been, and then also where you're going. So if you're pivoting, I'd want to see that in there, now pivoting, leaving 20 years of teaching to focus on adult training roles, pivoting into that. Some of my word is off the cuff right now, so my wording's not the best, but high level from kind of that 50,000 viewpoint right now. I want you to really challenge yourself to think about, where have I been and where am I really going, and how can I craft that in my resume using third person statements. I don't want to see first person I statements there. I want to see it written like a professional was describing you to the CEO in the elevator. Short, sweet, without using first person statements. I can tell you a tip is to write it initially using first person statements like, hey, Bill, Bill, have been here and have been great at this, and here's where Bill, am going. And then just to get the words down and then go back through it and try and rewrite it by swapping out the I's with more appropriate words. That's a really good writing tip for those of you that are sitting down to do this and really struggling. I would also recommend Google searching resume examples and take a peek at some of the ones out there on the internet that have strong summary sections, and use those for inspiration as well. And my resume cheat sheet can help a little bit with that as well. We'll look at that next. This is the top area where you want to have your key areas of talent or top accomplishments. For those that are more seasoned in their career, let's say at least 5 years of experience or more, think about, what are you the most proud of since you entered the workforce? What are the things that you're like, man, I worked full time and still got my bachelor's degree, or I was, the president's club winner for sales and 3 years ago, things like that, that you're just super proud of. And you want to make sure are emphasized. Those should be on the top of your resume under top accomplishments. And it can be a mix of job accomplishments and things that just speak to your work ethic or your detail orientation and things like that. So we'll look at some of the template examples from some ideas on how to do this. And just for what it's worth, all the templates we reviewed today are available for $12, or the live career site lets you do 3 for free. And then after that, I think it charges like $9.99 a month. And so for any of the other ones that are my documents, I'll make sure that the Nikki library has those, so you can refer to those as well. And here's the tricky part. The average reader really truly only looks at this for about 6 to 8 seconds. And it's hard to wrap your head around that, because I'm preaching, you got to spend time on the results, and you want to make sure you go through it and simplify it as much as possible. And you've got to have the right content in there. And now we have to worry about this ATS system and having a certain score. We'll cover some of that a little later, so don't worry too much there. But the reason why I emphasize this is, if somebody's looking at 50 different resumes, the ones that pop in 6 to 8 seconds are the ones that will capture their attention and cause them to read longer and take a more closer look at it. So your initial job is to first pick a template or have something on paper that's ATS friendly, and it doesn't have too many graphics or too much stuff going on it that just causes it to get kicked out. And if you're wondering how to really know that, anytime you apply, the ATS will parse out your resume and dump it into basically like their software. And you can tell how easily your resume is read based on how well it parses. It's never going to be perfect. There are coaches and resume writers out there that will swear this is the only one that's going to work, or you have to spend, $1,500 on my special patented whatever. That's complete garbage. Every ATS is different. Everything's going to read things a little bit differently, but you can test it out by knowing, if I upload it as a PDF, does it for the most part parse out okay? If it's not parsing out at all, it is completely unreadable or things like that, then you may have some issues there, and I'd refer you back to those template ideas. So starting there is really important. Also important is your ATS score, and at least not so much the score, but having the right keywords for the job. And we're going to talk about that later. But third is, does it look good and does it match what the job is looking for? So when someone looks at you on paper for 5 to 8 seconds, can they picture you succeeding in their role? Not so much what did you do and where's everywhere you've ever worked, but this is a marketing document. It's a personal branding document that's essentially advertising you to a job opening and trying to ask them for an interview. So trying to make sure that you use headers that really pop, bolding key things throughout so that it's eye-catching in that 6 to 8 seconds is really key. So let's go back to my resume cheat sheet quickly. And give some more visual examples of what I mean on the top third page. So for instance, they have some headers here. I put this here as a visual. These types of headers and insert savers that I've put need to match the jobs you're applying for. So if you were going into marketing, I'd want to see marketing. I'd want to see driving revenue. I'd want to see improving market share. Things that are really needed in the jobs you're applying to are what you would place here at the top, so that when they first look at the resume, the first thing they're thinking is, oh, okay, Bill has, some of the things I'm looking for and has a background in this. And then here I give some examples of how to give a summary about yourself, how to swap out different talents, and to really capture the reader by selling them on the highlights in the first section. I love putting talent and expertise right at the top, especially if there's certain technology or certain soft skills that a role needs. Definitely have those on the first third of the page. That's really going to bring attention to your background so that they want to read more further on. So let's just go back and look at one of the websites that I pulled up before. Go back to distinctive. If you just even search, I'm just under the shop feature right now, you'll get an idea for how they're really using headlines in the top 1/3 of that page to stand out. I'm just going to pull this one up for an example. This is really eye-catching. They've got their name, their contact information is really easy to find, but they have a target. Include your focus headline here, include target industries or other target info. This is a huge part of selling and branding yourself for the positions you're interested in. This small section here could be where you tell your story and where you've been and where you're going. And then we focus on what you're really, really good at. And right here, they have representative value add. This could be a great section where you put your 3 biggest wins ever throughout your career. And you'd want to pick wins that are relevant towards the jobs that you're going towards. So hopefully that gives a visual representation of why and how the top 1/3 of your resume is really important and can help people want to read it further. So going back, professional experience. This is really important. We'll look at this on the resume cheat sheet in a little bit. There's some tips there for making the section stand out. For the most part, bullets are mandatory and sub-bullets can be very helpful. It's okay to have a little bit of paragraph formatting throughout a resume, especially certain templates do a really good job of that and let you get more keywords in that way. But for the most part, the really important things like your results, the things you really want the hiring manager to see, put those in bullets and make sure they're easy to read. And I always recommend prioritize from most important to least. So if there's something that you think you've done and it's really relevant towards the jobs you're applying for, list that as your first bullet versus some of the less important ones can be later on down your bullet list. Numbers are key. If you take away nothing else from today, you need to have numbers. Ideally, 3 to 4 per job are key, no matter what your role. And if you don't have a number to prove something, back it up with context. How many, how long, how lengthy, things like that. That job search guide I mentioned in the beginning will really help you go through each position you've held for the last 5 job roles and ask the right questions to trigger how to weave in results and context. So I definitely recommend doing that exercise and going back to see what else you can put into your resume And I'll challenge you that that's also some of the best interview preparation you can do. The same type of approach you're doing in a resume is also what I would advise in an interview setting. So you want to be able to tell a story that has some type of a result or solution at the end, and ideally is backed up by some type of number or proof or otherwise some context in that answer. And really think about, what did you rock in every role? Like, what were you really good at? What are you really proud of? If someone was to say, okay, what 3 things are you the most proud of in this role? What about the one before that? Those are really the things I want you to include if possible, and leave all the other stuff out. There's a lot of things that are assumed. You would just expect someone, for instance, that was an HR manager at a small business, did benefits administration. Unless you have something really braggable, such as decreasing costs or rolling out a wellness program that helps save money or did something, I don't want to just see, process benefits administration. It's assumed with that type of a job title. So really focus on the things you did in that role that you're proud of, and you're like, hey, that was a lot of work. Let's get that on my resume and get some credit for that. Then the key becomes, how do we word that in as simple and straightforward as a way that people are able to read it and really understand it and see some proof. So you can take a look at my website again for that job search guide, but let's go back to the resume cheat sheet to give you some ideas. So you'll notice on here, going down, there's lots of different ways you can format this, and all of the different templates, or even the ones you're currently working with, will have that. One thing that I think a lot of folks forget is it's okay to describe the company in detail and describe the role in high level detail. Things like, who do you report to? How many folks do you oversee? What brag factors do you have about your company, department, or division? Oftentimes I'll hear from especially more entry level clients that, well, I'm not high enough up to have access to that, or I was just a small piece of this. And it's like, no, you're still a part of the team. You still helped accomplish something. And what the employer really cares about is your ability to see your connection to the team, to the business, to the goals, and to the end result, which is revenue or staying profitable. Or if you are in a nonprofit, what are the goals of the nonprofit? Did you help advance that mission? What are some of the accomplishments? So you really can factor in things that have to do with a division or team. It doesn't necessarily have to be just you. And this is a great area to do that. And you really want the reader to be impressed by something that you're a part of, but keep it short. And you can feel free to use bolds or italics throughout to stand out. And then you'll notice that I have the bullets here where we can put the accomplishments. Using sub bullets is a great way to really draw the reader's eye to something that's super important and you want them to see it right away. And you'll notice that bolding and doing italics helps do that as well. And you notice how by having it in bullet format, it's so much easier to read. I really want your accomplishments to be in a bulleted format because it's just the best practice, and it's so much easier for a recruiter to quickly skim it, or the hiring manager, and see the good things. So if you feel like your job's not that fancy, I hear that a lot too. Well, let's say you're flipping fries at McDonald's. Like, how many burgers did you flip on an hourly basis? How many calls do you take per hour? How many customers have you helped on the average shift? Is your record keeping 100% accurate? Have you ever upsold a customer? Put that in. Your accomplishments matter at every level of the organization. So I really want you to appreciate them. I go through a lot more examples like that on this resume cheat sheet. And I don't want to spend a lot of time like reading all of these today. I'm just going to challenge you after this presentation, when you sit down to enhance your resume or start from scratch, go back and read these carefully, take an attempt at writing your resume, but then go back and do it again and keep looking for ways to stand out and get some ideas for how you can start to format that into your own resume. So we talked earlier about this ATS system, and for some folks, it's a very like obscure thing to think of, and they can get really tripped up on it. So if you're wondering how that process works and how to know where your resume stacks up against the competition, the really nice part is there's websites that help you do this. So for tips on the scores or what keywords to pay attention to, these are just two sites that I can recommend that I use with clients. The first is skillsyncer.com and the second is jobscan.com. So either make a note of those or refer back or ask for a copy of this presentation. I'll include the entire presentation for the library as well. These sites will let you upload a job ad and your current resume, and it will give you your ATS score. And so then it will also walk you through some ways to enhance it. I advise clients, if you've been applying for a long time and you're not having any success, I do think it's worthwhile to start doing this for maybe the next 10 jobs you apply to. Once you get a feel for it and once you see what they're looking for, it starts to become common sense and pretty intuitive going forward for how to do some tweaks to your resume to improve that score. I don't think it's worthwhile to obsess over just because you don't know for sure. Like, a job ad doesn't mean anything. It could already be filled by an internal candidate. It could be something that they're not really having budget approval for 6 months. It could just be something that already was filled a month ago and no one took the ad down. So it's really not value added to spend too much time on this, because if you get all excited and see, oh, this job opening came up and it's perfect for me, and I spent 3 hours redoing my resume to make it perfect and I never got the interview, it's like, that's not an efficient use of your time. I think it's an efficient use to get a feel for it, start to kind of get an idea in mind of how to at least go from a score of, like, say 10 to 50 to get to more of like a 50 to 80. Now, that said, if you know there's a valid job opening and you know that the headcount was approved and that they're legit filling it and you really want to stand out, then yeah, I would make sure to do this exercise before you apply. But it's just not something you'll want to do for every single position every time, because frankly, networking and some tasks like that will be a far better use of your time than having the perfect ATS score on a resume. But that said, it's still a valuable exercise. I also like to recommend clients do this before they interview. If you upload their job ad, upload your resume, and remind yourself of the key things this employer is looking for in the interview, and you try and craft some interview answer examples that are focused on those types of keywords or those types of key functions or key needs of the employer, that can really help you as well. We're going to open it up to questions pretty soon. There's always a lot on resumes. We can use the chat feature if you don't feel comfortable sharing them yourself or being on the screen. We'll go through as many as we can fit in. We've got about 20 minutes left. If we don't have a lot of questions, we can always end early as well. I just want to urge everyone to visit my website for the free guide. I also have a free resume course that breaks this down into daily tasks that you can do over 2 weeks to get your resume put together. I have a lot of upcoming free job search masterminds. I share tons of information on LinkedIn. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear what you thought today, what was helpful, if I can connect you with anyone. And then I just want to end on, I think I hit on this a little, but dream big. So I mentioned that we don't always know if job ads are real because they could be filled, or there's just a variety of things that can go into it. But what was really interesting to me was working in HR. I would often test putting different job ads out with different titles, and the same job ad with a more complicated title would almost always get a 95% less response rate than a watered down title. So I might put something like project coordinator out there with the exact same job description as something that had a super complicated title that no one had heard of. And it always was fascinating to me because I would have expected people to go for the more challenging titles. But I think a lot of times our own insecurities and lack of confidence come into play in the job search process. So I definitely want to challenge you to, you don't need to have everything in the job ad. Like, if you even have 60% of it, throw your resume out there. It can't hurt to see what happens. And if they happen to call you, go through the process, because oftentimes recruiters are throwing like every wish list item out there, and they know it's not possible to find, but they think by doing that, they're casting their own net wider, or thinking that they'll find like a purple squirrel, unicorn, whatever the current phrase is, type of candidate that frankly doesn't exist. So just remember to really put yourself out there and dream big. And thank you for your time today. I'm going to go ahead and open up the chat feature so that if anyone has questions, we can cover those. Great question. Is there an ideal number of pages per resume? There are no hard and fast rules with this. Some people get the misconception they have to keep it to a page. My recommendation is to have as many pages as you need to showcase your skills and your talents and things like that. A rule of thumb would be, though, to typically only go back about 10, maybe 15 years tops. Because if you showcase everything from the time you started in the workforce, if you're over 40 like I am, you start to run into some age bias concerns. And so oftentimes folks that have too long of a resume can make that get down to 2 pages pretty quick by cutting off the older items. And if you're straight out of school and haven't had a ton of internship experience, I definitely would try to keep it to a page. When I see college students with barely any work experience filling 2 pages of a resume and just listing too much unnecessary stuff, it's just not very practical. But for the most part, I'd say between 1 and 3 pages is sort of the rule of thumb, but it's certainly okay to go on to that 3rd page if you're keeping it to within those 10 to 15 years. So hopefully that answers that question. A little tip there is if you have things that are older than, let's say, 10 years, but they're really relevant to the jobs you're applying to, you can consider doing a separate section where it's not part of your professional background or your most, recent work history, but you could entitle it a whole different header, like additional experience or additional background. And you can weave in the titles or weave in some of those results, but leave the years off. That way you can get that in there without them being able to tell your age. Do we have any other questions? Any tips for resumes when returning to work after extended childcare leave? This is a great one. Oftentimes, I would recommend if you did have any volunteer work, like if you were on the board at the preschool, or if you were room mom, or if you were doing anything with community service or things with their sports, list that on your resume. And you would want to probably put that more towards the top. So for instance, you might have your summary section where you talk about, Chelsea did this for this long. And then, after taking I don't like to put family on the resume, but after, you can just say now something like, 15 years of marketing experience, really talented at X, Y, and Z. Now returning to the workforce, seeking a position as a marketing analyst, something like that. You're giving your story without saying, I love to take care of kids or, deal with family members. And then you can focus on your key skills and areas of expertise, but you could move something like community service up or community involvement and place that there. Now, a lot of times returning parents don't have that. I mean, I know when I stayed home with my kids, childcare is expensive. And for a lot of us, we didn't have that option to go volunteer or do a lot of things because we were busy with kids. So in that case, I would recommend if there's any free training you can do to showcase that you have some relevant skills. So like LinkedIn Learning is a good one, Coursera is a good one. Anything that you can find for free. I'm a big believer in doing freebies before paying for things. You could put something like current training or recent training as perhaps the next header under your summary and key skills, so that you can showcase like, okay, I'm looking to return to sales. I just, took these 3 or 4 courses on sales, getting up to speed, that kind of thing. And then you can still get into your professional background and list the years. Oftentimes there's usually something you've done in some capacity that you could put up there from a community involvement standpoint, or can you think about finding it? A lot of times that could be a very value added exercise. If your kids have now started school and you're ready to kind of get back at the workforce, can you take 2 to 3 months to really come up with a strategic plan of, this is the role I want, and I know these are some of the things they're looking for. What can I do in the meantime to get me up to speed or to market me more appropriately for those types of roles? Join a volunteer group, get on a committee, get involved in some things that you can put on your resume. And I will definitely recommend get involved in your professional association if there's one relevant to your field. Getting involved in that, like for instance, if you were returning to HR, I'd say you better be a member of the Greater Madison Area SHRM. If you're local to Madison, start going to their meetings, get on a committee. Those are the sort of things to get involved in, to network, to get on the top of your resume. And frankly, worry more about doing those things and starting to network than freaking out about how to have the perfect resume or how to cover a gap. You won't be able to cover it. You can showcase what you're doing to return. So hopefully that helps answer that one, because those can really help you stand out. Yes, good question. Do not list dates on your resume under education unless you are 2 years or less out of school and you don't have great internship experience, or you haven't found your first job yet, or let's say you took some time off before you decided to look for work. Then I would leave education years on, because it's making it obvious why you don't have more of a work history. But for anyone else besides that, keep it off your resume and keep it off your LinkedIn profile as well, so that they can't figure out what your age is. Absolutely. Great question. This is a good one. How do you distinguish your resume from a cover letter so you're not repeating yourself without adding value? I'm going to make a note of this. I have some cover letter samples, and I'm going to send those to the library as well so that they can pass on to the group. Your cover letter should have nothing to do with your resume. The cover letter should only talk about what you can do for that employer. So a script I like to follow is having like the date, the address, who it's going towards. If you can figure out a name, great. Otherwise, dear hiring manager, here's why I'm looking for a job right now. You want to address the elephant in the room. They're going to be wondering, were you let go? Like, did something bad happen? They want to know why you're looking. They're curious. There's lots of different ways you can professionally address that. And I can always help with that offline, but you address that in paragraph 1, and then you get right into what are the top 3 things you can do for them in that role. Ask for the interview sincerely, like, thank you for your time, sincerely sign your name. So I've got 3 different samples I will send, and those will help visually. And what I like to recommend is do like a save as on your resume and have the same type of look and feel for your cover letter. So the same font, the same colors, even perhaps some of the same headers, but you market it towards what you'll do for them in that role. So I think my visuals will help with that. And a lot of times you don't see that cover letters are necessarily required nowadays. State government, higher education, nonprofits, those all still almost hands down require cover letters, but oftentimes in the private sector, startups, things like that, if they don't require one, I wouldn't waste the time on it. They're probably not reading it, or they're getting so many applications, it's not really worthwhile. But if you can start to craft a really good one and you can use that as a way to stand out and sell them on your value, then I would definitely recommend including one. So play around with it. You can do trial and error and see, do I get more callbacks when I use the cover letter, or is it not really making a difference? Then I'm not going to spend the time on it. Typically, my search strategies involve a realistic approach of both. When I advise clients, it's like, do it for the dream job, do it for a few to see if it makes a difference. But sometimes you do want to get a little volume out there, and do a couple quick applies is okay too. Okay, well, unless we have any other questions today, I think we can start to wrap up and hit stop on the record just to give anyone a chance to ask any questions offline from the recording. And then I think we can finish. But thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you found this helpful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I have lots of great resources on my website, and I'm always happy to point you to other ones or other free job search groups that I'm aware of through my network, because there's lots of good ones even right here in Madison and Milwaukee, oftentimes, which are virtual. So I'm happy to point those out as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I just want to real quick before I stop the recording, let everybody know that the recording will be on the library's YouTube, and then we'll also on our website link to your resources mentioned, your website. We have a job services resource page on our website that will be available at. So.
Awesome.